I do not see death, but I feel the icy breath of hunger and the beast. Aksinya, the YAKUT elder whose eyes had long since closed, felt the earth tremble. 1,000 reindeer, the lifeblood of her village, were trapped, and 6 colossal white shadows, each weighing over 1,500 kilograms, blocked their only escape. The blizzard's howl was a funeral dirge. But the blind elder knew the true danger wasn't what she couldn't see, but what she had to feel to survive. And what she would do to guide her people through that icy darkness would shock the world. Aksinya raised her wrinkled face to the wind, which kissed her skin with promises of heavier snow. Her thin lips, chapped by the cold, moved in a whisper, an ancient prayer to the earth. Around her, the villagers' faces were grey with despair, their eyes fixed on the agitated reindeer and the imposing silhouettes of the bears. Presences felt like a weight in their chests. "What shall we do, Aksinya?" Yura's voice, a sturdy man, trembled. His shoulders slumped and he squeezed the hands of his wife, Lena, who held their young child. Fear was palpable. A cold mist spreading faster than the blizzard. The bears are huge, and the blizzard, it will swallow us if we stay. The elder slowly turned towards Yura's voice, her ears catching the hopelessness. She extended a hand, thin, gnarled fingers touching the air, as if reading invisible currents. A faint smile of peace appeared on her face. "We will not stay, Yura, and we will not be swallowed." Her gaze, though blind, seemed to penetrate the darkness and skepticism. "The earth speaks, my children. It has always spoken, and now it shows us a path." A murmur of disbelief rippled through the group. How could a blind, frail woman see a path where even the most experienced hunters found no hope? Some shook their heads, others averted their gaze, shame mixed with despair. They respected her for her wisdom and for having survived countless winters, but to guide 1,000 reindeer with 6 gigantic polar bears lurking and a blizzard imminent, it seemed like madness. Aksinya felt the hesitation, the doubt gnawing at her people's faith. It was an obstacle as great as the bears or the snow, but she knew that true strength lay not in the sight of the eyes, but in the vision of the heart. She took a deep breath, the icy air filling her lungs with ancestral energy. The bears are strong, yes, but the earth is stronger, and hunger. Hunger is a beast we cannot feed with fear. She took a step forward, her birch staff tapping the snow-covered ground. "I feel the fissures in the ice, the passages the wind has carved. There is a path the bears do not know, a path that only the ice whispers to me." The villagers watched her, some with curiosity, others with distrust. Aksinya didn't need to see their faces. She felt the vibration of the earth beneath her feet, the pulse of the reindeer, the heavy silence of the bears, and the fear of her people. She felt the promise of life, the responsibility for every soul among them, and the unbreakable connection to the land that nourished her. She would be their compass, their eyes in the darkness, and her heart, the beacon that would guide them away from hunger and death. With determination etched into every line of her face, Aksinya took the first step, her birch staff, polished by years of use, tapping the ground with a soft, decisive sound. The world for her was not a tapestry of colors, but a symphony of textures, vibrations, and scents. She saw the path with her feet, felt the density of the snow, the firmness of the ice, the direction of the wind that carried the metallic scent of the approaching blizzard, and the distant odor of the bears. Behind her, the villagers exchanged glances, their pale faces reflecting the fading light of the day. Doubt was a heavy burden, but hunger was an even crueler whip. Yura, with Lena and little Misha nestled in his arms, was the first to move, a heavy sigh escaping his lips. He trusted Aksinya, not out of logic, but from an ancestral faith the village carried. Others followed him, dragging their feet through the soft snow, their eyes fixed on the frail figure of the elder who seemed to walk with unwavering certainty. The reindeer, sensing the movement, began to stir, their hooves tapping on the ice, a muffled sound that blended with the rising howl of the wind. Axinia raised her hand, a gesture that needed no words to be understood. "Slowly, my children. The ice is an open book for those who know how to read its cracks." Her voice, though soft, carried the authority of one who had survived winters that had claimed lives and hopes. She guided the herd eastward, towards an area that, to the eyes of others, seemed an impassable tangle of rocks and ice. But Axinia felt the air currents passing between the formations, indicating narrow, almost invisible passages. Skepticism still lingered, an icy ghost. "There's no path here, Axinia," murmured a young hunter, Boris, who had tried that route countless times without success. His eyes swept the horizon, searching for the white silhouettes of the predators, who now seemed to have vanished into the blizzard that was beginning to fall harder, shrouding the landscape in a merciless white mantle. The fear that the bears were lurking, invisible in the mist, tightened their hearts. The elder merely tilted her head, as if listening to a melody only she could discern. "The path is there, Boris, not for eyes that see the obvious, but for the heart that feels the invisible." She extended her hand, and a snowflake landed on her wrinkled palm, melting instantly. "I feel the breath of the ice. It moves, it sings, and it will guide us." Axinia didn't see the apprehensive faces, but she felt the tension in the air, the trembling of the reindeer, the heavy silence of the villagers. She knew that the true journey was not just physical, but a crossing through the darkness of despair. She needed to be more than a guide. She needed to be the flame that would rekindle faith in her people, the living proof that resilience was the most powerful of visions. Every step was an act of courage, a silent promise that life, even in the icy heart of Yakutia, would find its way. The blizzard, once a distant promise, now enveloped the group in an icy, suffocating embrace. The flakes, once sparse, transformed into a dense curtain that whipped faces and blinded the eyes of those who could still see. Axinia, however, seemed immune to the fury of the weather. Her staff tapped the ice with a precision bordering on miraculous, each touch revealing to her the solidity or fragility of the path. The sound of the reindeer's hooves, once a distant murmur, was now an anxious chorus, the warmth of their bodies a brief yet vital blessing in the white immensity. Yura, with Misha nestled under his fur coat, felt his heart clench with each gust of wind. He watched Axinia, the tiny figure ahead, and tried to find in her the strength he lacked. Lena, beside him, held her husband's hand, her eyes watering from cold and uncertainty. "She knows what she's doing, doesn't she?" Lena whispered, more to herself than to Yura. He merely squeezed her hand in response, a silent promise that faith, however tenuous, still burned. The elder stopped abruptly, raising her face to the wind. Her lips moved again, not in prayer, but in a silent reading of the messages the air carried. She felt the vibration of the ice beneath her feet, a complex melody of tensions and reliefs. "There's a crevice here," she announced, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the blizzard's howl. "A narrow but safe passage. The bears don't know it." Boris, the young hunter, approached, disbelief etched on his ice-covered face. "But Axinia, there's never been a passage here. It's just a wall of ice and rock." He pointed to the indistinct mass that the blizzard made even more impenetrable. His voice carried the weight of reason and experience, but Axinia merely smiled, a smile that warmed the heart despite the biting cold. "Eyes see what they expect to see, Boris, but the earth reveals its secrets to those who feel it." She extended her hand, and her thin fingers touched the icy surface, tracing the fissures invisible to the eye. "The wind carved this path. It's tight, but it will lead us beyond the predator's reach." The villagers approached, their gazes fixed on the elder. The blizzard intensified, and the idea of standing still was more terrifying than following a blind woman through an unknown passage. With a nod, Aksinya indicated the way. The reindeer, guided by the herders who trusted the elder, began to move one by one through the narrow opening Aksinya had discovered. It was a tight gorge, where the ice rose in smooth walls and sharp rocks threatened at every step. With every meter, the tension mounted. The air in the gorge was dense and cold, the sound of the wind muffled by the ice walls. Aksinya walked at the front, her staff tapping rhythmically like a heart guiding the body. She felt the slightest changes in the terrain's incline, the texture of the ice beneath her feet, the humidity in the air that indicated the proximity of an opening. Suddenly, a loud, frightening crack echoed through the gorge. The ice beneath her feet trembled, and a murmur of panic ran through the line of villagers. "What was that? Aksinya?" Yura cried out, his voice choked with fear. He clutched Misha to him, shielding his son from the invisible threat. Aksinya stopped, her face serene, despite the tremor she felt in the ice. "It is the earth breathing, my children. It is the ice adjusting. Do not fear, it will not betray us." She extended her hand and touched the ice wall beside her, as if calming a living creature. "I feel its strength. I feel its promise that it will carry us forward." Her sharpened senses picked up something more, a distant, heavy scent that the wind carried, even within the gorge. The bears were nearby, perhaps not seeing them, but sensing their presence. The race against time and hunger was more urgent than ever. Faith in Aksinya, however improbable, was the only compass they had. The crack in the ice reverberated, not just in the icy air, but in the soul of every villager. A terrified silence followed Yura's cry, who now embraced Misha with desperate strength, his eyes wide, fixed on the elder. Lena, pale, could barely breathe, her gaze sweeping the ice walls in search of a visible danger that, fortunately, did not materialize. Aksinya, however, remained motionless, her staff still touching the icy wall, as if in communion with the earth itself. She felt the vibration dissipate, the tension resettle, and a faint smile of understanding appeared on her wrinkled lips. "The earth is alive, my children," she repeated, her voice soft, yet imbued with an authority that calmed their agitated hearts. "The ice moves, expands, and contracts with the cold. This crack is merely it settling, finding its new balance. There is no danger, only the ancient voice of winter reminding us of its presence." She withdrew her hand from the wall and gestured for them to continue. "Follow me. The path is narrow, but firm." Despite the momentary relief, fear persisted, a cold shadow clinging to everyone. Boris, the hunter, watched Aksinya with a mixture of admiration and perplexity. How could she be so calm, so certain, when he, with his young, experienced eyes, saw only imminent danger and the darkness of the blizzard? He noticed how the reindeer, previously agitated, seemed to have calmed somewhat at the elder's voice, following the narrow trail with an almost mystical obedience. They were 1,000 hearts beating in unison, and the responsibility for each of them weighed heavily on Aksinya. The passage became even tighter, the ice walls almost brushing the flanks of the larger reindeer. The air grew heavy, saturated with the scent of the animals and the biting cold. Aksinya guided them with a precision that seemed supernatural. Her bare feet, protected only by thick fur boots, felt the nuances of the ice, the small elevations and depressions, the more solid areas and those requiring caution. She moved her staff not just to tap, but to draw the path in her mind, an invisible map constructed from sensations. Yura, who came right behind the first reindeer, felt the cold penetrate his bones. But the warmth of Misha in his arms was a constant reminder of what was at stake. He looked at Lena, who now walked with her head down, shoulders hunched, but without complaining. Aksinia's determination was a beacon, a silent force that propelled them forward. Every step was a victory over weariness and doubt. Suddenly, Aksinia stopped again. There was no crack this time, just a profound silence that swallowed the wind's howl and the sound of hooves. She raised her head, her keen ears catching something others could not. A scent, stronger now, of meat and fur mixed with the icy air. The bears. They were nearby, perhaps not in the gorge, but lurking, sensing the herd's presence. Her thin lips tightened. "We are coming, my children," she whispered. Her voice a thread of hope in the darkness. "The ice opens ahead, but we need to be quick and silent. They are waiting for us." The urgency in her voice was unmistakable. The villagers exchanged glances, fear returning with renewed force. The idea of leaving the gorge, of exposing themselves again to the white immensity and invisible predators, was terrifying. But Aksinia had already taken the first step again, her frail figure advancing with unwavering courage. Everyone's fate hung on her wisdom and her unwavering faith in the earth. The narrow passage finally opened, not to a safe shelter, but to the relentless vastness of the tundra, now a blank and grey canvas under the blizzard's fury. The snowflakes didn't fall. They danced in violent whirlwinds, whipping the air and obscuring all visibility. Aksinia took the first step out, her birch staff testing the ground, finding not the solid, protective ice of the gorge, but a thinner, treacherous layer, covered by soft snow. The scent of the bears, once distant, was now a suffocating presence in the wind, an icy reminder of the threat that awaited them. Yura, with Misha asleep in his arms, felt his heart race at the sight of the white immensity. The illusory safety of the gorge had vanished, and they were once again exposed, tiny specks in a hostile world. Lena squeezed his arm, her eyes wide with terror as she tried to discern something in the blizzard. "They're out there, Yura," she whispered, her voice choked. "I feel it." Aksinia, however, seemed unfazed. She raised her face, allowing the icy wind to kiss her skin, reading the air currents as if they were pages of a book. Her ears caught the distant creak of the ice, the murmur of accumulating snow, and the heavy silence that sometimes cut through the wind's howl. A silence she knew to be the harbinger of a massive presence. "Follow me closely," she instructed, her voice calm, yet with a palpable urgency. "The ice here is like a web. Every step must be felt, not just seen." Boris, the young hunter, watched her with growing admiration. He, who relied so much on his eyes, now felt blind in the blizzard. Aksinia, without sight, seemed to see further, more deeply. He saw the elder lean slightly, her staff touching the ice at a specific point, and then she moved with surprising agility for her age, swerving away from an area that to him looked identical to the rest. A moment later, a low, ominous crack came from that very spot she had avoided, a sound that sent a chill down Boris's spine. "She felt it," he murmured, more to himself. She truly felt the weakness of the ice. The reindeer, guided by the herders who had learned to trust the elder blindly, followed in single file, their hooves heavy yet cautious, tapping the ground. The herd was a mass of warmth and life, but also a tempting target for the predators. Aksinia felt the animals' tension, the scent of their fear, and this propelled her. She could not fail. Hunger was a shadow stretching over the village, and her people's hope rested on her frail shoulders. The elder continued to guide, her steps firm and decisive. She was leading them in an unexpected direction, to an area the villagers avoided, considering it a labyrinth of unstable ice. But Aksinia felt something different. She felt the pulse of the earth, the subterranean currents that shaped the ice, and a passage only she could discern. The wind, her silent confidant, brought her messages, whispering of the bear's proximity, but also of the promise of a path. Suddenly, the wind shifted, bringing an even stronger, denser scent. A low, guttural growl echoed through the blizzard, so close it made the reindeer rear up, their eyes wide with terror. Yura clutched Misha and looked at Aksinya, panic etched on his face. "They're here!" he cried. Aksinya stopped. Her lips moved in an inaudible whisper, a deep connection with the earth. She knew confrontation was imminent, but she had a plan, a daring plan that relied on her unique ability to feel the ice and the wind. The village was on the brink of the abyss, but Aksinya, the blind elder, was about to show that true vision lies in resilience and unwavering faith. She raised her staff, pointing to an invisible spot in the blizzard, and a glint of determination lit her face. The moment of truth had arrived. Aksinya did not hesitate. The guttural growl, which had made the reindeer rear up and Yura cry out in panic, was for her a confirmation. Her thin lips curved in concentration. She felt the vibration of the air, the fear of her people, and the immense weight of the approaching predators, their icy breaths. "They are close," Aksinya affirmed, her voice calm amidst the blizzard. "But we are also close. Close to our salvation." She raised her staff, pointing to an invisible spot in the vast white expanse. It was not a path, but an area of ice that to Yura's and Boris's eyes seemed indistinct, perhaps more dangerous, and from where the growl seemed to have come. Yura, with Misha trembling in his arms, felt a chill. Salvation. Aksinya. I see nothing but snow and ice. The growl came from there. Lena, beside him, let out a moan. Aksinya turned her face towards Yura's voice, a faint smile appearing. "Your eyes see the threat, Yura. My senses see the opportunity." She took a firm step, her staff touching the ice lightly. This ice here, it sings a different song, a song of fragility and strength. It is where the earth breathes most deeply. The villagers exchanged glances, confusion and despair on their faces. The idea of approaching where the bears were, of trusting a song of the ice that only Aksinya heard, seemed like madness. Boris, the hunter, felt a knot in his throat. His mind, trained for the logic of the hunt, screamed for them to retreat. But Aksinya's determination was a magnet, pulling them against reason. "Aksinya," Boris began, his voice choked. "What do you intend to do? We can't fight 1,500-kilogram bears, and the ice, it seems too fragile." The elder stopped, the wind whipping her white hair. She extended her hand, a snowflake melting in her palm. "We will not fight with strength, Boris. We will fight with the wisdom of the earth. The ice is fragile, yes, but it is in that fragility that our greatest strength lies." She turned towards the direction of the growl, which now seemed closer. The reindeer, sensing the predator's proximity, stirred again. "The ice here has a vein," Aksinya explained, her voice taking on an almost mystical yet clear tone. "A fault that extends beneath the surface, invisible to the eye, but palpable to those who feel the earth's pulse. It is a weakness that the bears, in their mass and haste, will not perceive, but we will use it." A murmur of understanding and terror ran through the villagers. Aksinya did not intend to flee the fragile ice. She intended to use it to create a deafening distraction. The risk was immense, but faith in her was the only compass. Aksinya felt the hesitation. She knew this was the turning point, the moment to test their faith. She took a deep breath, the icy air filling her lungs. "Trust the earth, my children. Trust me." She took another step towards the point she had indicated, her staff raised, like a baton, about to begin a dangerous and hopeful symphony. Her people's fate lay in the hands of the blind elder and her unwavering connection to the icy heart of Yakutia. She was ready to play the melody of the ice. Aksinya raised her staff not as a weapon, but as a conductor preparing to lead an invisible orchestra. Her thin, wrinkled fingers tightened around the polished wood, and she took a step, this time with a different intention. It was not a step of caution, but of purpose. The bear's growl, now closer and deeper, seemed to come from several directions, echoing in the swirling blizzard. Yura, with Misha nestled against his chest, felt the ground vibrate beneath his feet. He looked at Aksinya, awaiting a word, but she was immersed in her world of sensations. She stopped at the point she had discerned, where the vein of ice was most vulnerable. With a slow, deliberate movement, Aksinya plunged the tip of her staff into the ice, not with force, but with surgical precision. She wasn't trying to break the ice immediately, but rather to find the exact point of its fragility, like a doctor palpating a broken bone. A tense silence hung over the group, broken only by the wind's howl and the accelerated beating of their hearts. Suddenly, Aksinya applied firm pressure, twisting her staff slightly. A low sound, like a deep sigh from the earth, began to emanate from the ice. It wasn't a violent crack, but a growing groan, a lament that spread beneath the surface. The villagers held their breath. It was the song Aksinya had mentioned, a dissonant melody of ice under tension. The groan intensified, transforming into a sharp, prolonged creak that seemed to scratch at the soul. The reindeer, already agitated, reacted with sudden panic. Their hooves pounded on the ice and they began to push each other, seeking an instinctive escape from the deafening sound. Chaos ensued for a brief moment, but the herders, remembering Aksinya's urgency, tried to contain the herd, guiding them towards the passage the elder had indicated. The creaking of the ice reached its peak, a shrill cry that seemed to tear the air and the very fabric of the tundra. And then, with a crash that made the ground tremble violently, an enormous slab of ice broke, not directly beneath Aksinya's feet, but a few meters away in the direction from which the bear's growls had come. Icy water gushed upwards, mixing with the snow, and a dark abyss opened, revealing the frigid depth of the subterranean river. The sound of the rupture was so colossal that for an instant it drowned out the blizzard's howl, and even the reindeer's panic. The villagers staggered, some falling to their knees, their faces contorted in shock and terror. Yura clutched Misha so tightly that the boy awoke, whimpering. Lena let out a muffled cry, her eyes fixed on the crater that had opened in the ice. But the bear's reaction was immediate, and exactly as Aksinya had foreseen. The furious growl transformed into a sound of surprise, and then into a roar of frustration and alarm. The predators, who had been approaching cautiously, were caught off guard by the sudden and deafening collapse of the ice. Their mass and weight, which would have been an advantage in a direct attack, became an impediment. They couldn't risk falling into the icy water, and the noise disoriented them. Aksinya, despite the trembling ground, remained standing, her face serene, almost triumphant. She didn't see the crevice, but she felt the void that had opened, the current of icy air rising from the water. "Now!" she cried, her voice thin yet powerful, cutting through the chaos. "Now, my children, move! Quickly!" Boris, the hunter, was the first to react, surprise giving way to stunned admiration. He saw the white forms of the bears retreat, hesitating before the newly formed crevice. The distraction was perfect. "Let's go!" he bellowed, pointing in the opposite direction from the bears, towards where Aksinya had planned the escape route. The herders, galvanized by Aksinya's command and the sight of the retreating bears, began to guide the reindeer with renewed vigor. The herd, still frightened, but now with a clear path and without the immediate threat of predators, began to move, their hooves tapping rhythmically on the snow. Yura, with Misha still whimpering but safe, took Lena's hand and ran, his faith in Aksinya restored and stronger than ever. The elder, the true visionary, had transformed danger into salvation, using the earth itself as her ally. The path was open, but the journey was still far from over. The roar of cracking ice still reverberated in the villagers' ears as they surged forward, propelled by Aksinia's voice and the sight of the bears retreating into the blizzard. Boris, with a renewed energy bordering on euphoria, shouted orders to the herders, guiding the reindeer away from the open crevice and towards the white immensity Aksinia had chosen. The herd, a mass of hooves and antlers, moved with desperate urgency, the scent of their fear mixing with the icy air and the smell of snow. Yura, still clutching Misha to him, felt his heart pound erratically. His son's crying had ceased, replaced by an exhausted silence as the boy nestled into his father's warmth. Lena, beside Yura, stumbled in the soft snow, but did not stop. Her eyes, once filled with dread, now carried a spark of hope, a reflection of Aksinia's unwavering faith. She looked at the elder, who walked ahead with an almost supernatural serenity, her staff tapping rhythmically, a sound that had become the melody of survival. Aksinia, indeed, felt the pulse of the earth beneath her feet, the vibration of the reindeer's hooves, and the wind that whispered secrets about the terrain ahead. The scent of the bears diminished, but she knew they were not entirely out of danger. The distraction had been effective, but the predators were persistent. She guided them along a route that, to the eyes of others, seemed indistinct, an endless sea of snow and ice. But for Aksinia, it was a detailed map of sensations, where every elevation, every depression, every change in ice density was a landmark. "Maintain your pace, my children," she instructed, her voice calm but firm, cutting through the wind's howl. "The path is long, but the ice sustains us." Boris, who now walked closer to the elder, observed her movements with profound admiration. He, the most experienced hunter in the village, who had always relied on sight and strength, now found himself following a blind woman, guided by a wisdom that transcended what his eyes could see. He noticed how Aksinia tilted her head, as if listening to the earth, and how her steps were always firm, even when the ice beneath them seemed unstable. The blizzard continued relentlessly, whipping their faces and filling the air with ice flakes. The cold penetrated layers of skin and clothing, but the need to move forward was stronger than the pain. The reindeer, though exhausted, continued to trot, sensing the urgency in their herders. They were the life of the village, and each one of them was a step closer to salvation. Yura felt Misha's weight in his arms, but also the warmth of his small life, a constant reminder that they could not give up. He looked at Lena, who gave him a weak but determined smile. The connection between them, the promise of a future for their son, was the fuel that kept them moving. Aksinia, with a faint smile on her wrinkled lips, felt the change in the wind. It now carried a different scent, a smell of pine trees and frozen earth, a sign that safe pastures were approaching. The journey would still demand every ounce of her strength and faith, but hope, once a tenuous thread, now wove itself into a stronger tapestry, guided by the blind elder who saw with her heart. The scent of pine trees and frozen earth, once a mere whisper on the wind, now grew more distinct, a promise of shelter amidst the relentless fury of the blizzard. Aksinia, with a faint smile on her wrinkled lips, felt the change in the air, the subtle humidity that indicated the proximity of trees, even if invisible to the eye. Her feet, despite the weariness, maintained a steady rhythm, a silent beat of faith against the white vastness. She guided the herd not only by scent, but by a complex symphony of sensations. The wind changing direction, the muffled sound of reindeer hooves in softer snow, the vibration of the ice beneath her feet becoming more irregular, dotted with rocks and frozen roots. Yura, with Misha still asleep in his arms, felt the weight of his son and the exhaustion that weighed upon him. Every step was a monumental effort, but the sight of Lena walking beside him, her eyes fixed on Aksinia's figure, renewed his strength. Lena, in turn, felt the cold penetrate her clothes, but the warmth of hope, kindled by the elder, propelled her forward. She looked at Aksinia, at the way the elder moved with a certainty that defied the blizzard's darkness, and a profound admiration filled her heart. True vision, she realized, was not in the eyes, but in the soul. Boris, the hunter, who now stayed closer to Aksinia, observed every movement of the elder with growing reverence. He, who had always relied on strength and cunning, now found himself learning a new way to hunt, to survive, guided by a wisdom he never imagined existed. He noticed how Aksinia tilted her head, as if listening to the trees themselves, and how her staff, once merely a support, seemed an extension of her senses, tapping the path with almost magical precision. "We're almost there, aren't we, Aksinia?" he asked, his voice hoarse with cold and emotion. The elder turned her face towards Boris's voice, a gentle smile forming. "The earth speaks to us, my son, and it says we are close to the forest's embrace, but the path is still treacherous. The bears, they feel the change in the air too. We need to be quick and silent." The mention of the predators brought a renewed chill, but faith in Aksinia was stronger than fear. The reindeer, sensing the proximity of more familiar terrain, began to show signs of renewed energy, their hooves tapping with more vigor. Aksinia guided them through snow-covered rock formations, through shallow valleys where the wind howled with less intensity, and through areas where ice mixed with earth, creating an uneven and slippery surface. She felt the forest's pulse, the life dormant beneath the snow, and knew that there they would find not only pastures, but a temporary refuge from the blizzard's fury and the bear's pursuit. The village, exhausted and hungry, was a few steps away from new hope, guided by the elder who saw with her heart. As they entered the forest's edge, the blizzard seemed to lessen its intensity, as if the trees offered a protective shield. However, the terrain became more challenging. Thick, gnarled roots, invisible beneath the snow, turned every step into a test of balance. Low branches whipped their faces, and the snow, deeper and softer among the trees, sank their feet, demanding double effort. The scent of pine was now overwhelming, mixing with the damp aroma of frozen earth and the smell of the reindeer themselves, who huddled together. Seeking warmth and safety, Yura felt his leg muscles burn, and Misha, though still sleeping, seemed heavier with each meter. He looked at Lena, whose lips were chapped by the cold, but whose eyes still shone with silent determination. She stumbled on a root, but Yura held her firmly, a gesture of support that spoke louder than any words. The connection between them, the promise of a future for their son, was the fuel that kept them moving, even when exhaustion threatened to overwhelm them. Aksinia, however, seemed revitalized by the forest's proximity. Her steps, once firm, were now almost dancing, as if she were in tune with the earth itself. Her staff tapped the ground with surprising agility, swerving around obstacles that others only noticed when stumbling. She tilted her head, her ears catching the rustle of snow falling from branches, the distant creak of trees under the weight of ice, and the murmur of wildlife hiding in the shadows. "We are home for now," she whispered, her voice almost inaudible, yet full of contained emotion. "The forest embraces us, but we cannot let our guard down." Boris, who followed her closely, saw the elder stop suddenly, raising her hand. The attentive herders immediately contained the herd. A heavy silence fell over the forest, broken only by the distant howl of the wind and the soft sound of falling snow. Aksinia turned her face towards the forest's darkness, her lips moving in a whisper. She didn't see the bears, but she felt their presence, a shiver down her spine that wasn't from cold, but from a latent threat. They had escaped immediate danger, but the journey to complete salvation was still uncertain. The forest offered shelter, but also hid dangers, and Aksinia's vigilance was the only light in their darkness. The air, already heavy with the scent of pine and the reindeer's breath, suddenly carried a new, icy note, the unmistakable odor of polar bears, closer now, more intense. Axinia stopped abruptly, her staff suspended in the air for an instant, like a pendulum sensing an invisible disturbance. Her thin lips tightened, and a deep furrow formed between her eyebrows, even though her eyes remained closed. She didn't need to see to know. The earth, the wind, the very silence of the forest screamed the predator's presence. Boris, who watched her, noticed the elder's instantaneous change. Her face, once serene, now displayed palpable tension. He followed Axinia's invisible gaze, trying to discern something in the forest's darkness, but saw only the incessant dance of snowflakes and the deep shadows among the trees. The reindeer, in turn, sensed the danger with instinctive clarity. A murmur of fear ran through the herd, and they began to stir, their antlers brushing against each other, their hooves nervously tapping the snow. Yura felt a shiver run down his spine. Misha, who had awakened with the movement, clung to his neck, feeling his father's terror. Lena squeezed Yura's hand, her eyes wide with dread. The weariness, once a dull ache, now transformed into acute panic. They were trapped in the forest, and the sight of the bears, even if not yet visible, was an imminent threat. Axinia raised her hand again, a gesture that called for silence and attention. "They are approaching," she whispered, her voice low, yet imbued with an urgency that made everyone's heart leap. "Two of them, at least, are trying to flank us using the density of the trees, but the forest holds a secret." She turned her head slightly, as if mapping the terrain with her ears. There is a passage, narrow, winding, where the ice meets the rocks and the snow is deepest. The reindeer can pass, the bears. They will hesitate. Boris looked in the direction Axinia indicated. The forest there seemed impenetrable, a labyrinth of pines and firs, with large snow-covered rock formations. "It's too tight, Axinia," he murmured, doubt in his voice. "The reindeer might get hurt, and what if the bears trap us inside?" The elder turned her face to him, and Boris saw a glint of determination in her eyes, even though they were blind. "It's our only chance, my son. The bears are large, heavy. They won't risk a place where they can't maneuver. Their strength will be their weakness. Trust the earth." She took a firm step towards the passage, her staff tapping the way with astonishing precision. "Follow me! Quickly! Keep the herd together!" The herders, though fearful, obeyed. With shouts and gestures, they began to push the reindeer into the narrow opening. The herd, in a panic, but guided by the familiarity of their caretakers' voices, began to squeeze between the trees and rocks. The sound of hooves and antlers scraping against wood and stone filled the air, mixing with the wind's howl and the distant growls of the bears, who now seemed more furious, realizing the maneuver. Axinia led the way, her steps firm and decisive. She felt the texture of the snow beneath her feet, the incline of the terrain, the proximity of the trees. The passage was indeed treacherous, with slippery ice in some spots and deep snow in others, but she navigated it with surprising grace. Yura, with Misha trembling in his arms, followed closely, his eyes fixed on the elder's silhouette. Lena, beside him, stumbled, but refused to fall, hope and fear battling in her chest. Suddenly Axinia stopped again, raising her staff. A powerful growl, closer than ever, echoed through the passage, making the ground vibrate. One of the bears, a colossal white form, appeared at the entrance of the passage, blocking the view from behind. It tried to advance, but its massive body became wedged between two trees and a rock. The bear roared in frustration, pawing at the snow, unable to follow. Axinia smiled, a small, satisfied smile. "The forest protects us," she whispered. "Go forward, they cannot reach us here." The villagers, seeing the trapped predator, felt a wave of relief and triumph. Axinia's strategy had worked. The passage, once an obstacle, had become their salvation. The herd, propelled by a new surge of energy, quickened its pace, emerging from the narrow passage into a more open clearing, where the scent of fresh pastures was unmistakable. The village was saved. The village was saved. The clearing, a sanctuary covered by finer snow, opened before them. The scent of pine and frozen moss was a balm for their exhausted souls. The reindeer, with a collective sigh, quickly spread out, sniffing and digging through the snow, revealing the undergrowth and lichens, their first food in days. The sight of the herd grazing, even in the blizzard, was a spectacle of pure hope. Yura, with Misha nestled and safe, felt his legs give way. He fell to his knees in the soft snow, his head bowed, allowing tears of relief and gratitude to stream down. Lena knelt beside him, embracing him, her silent weeping mixing with his. Misha, sensing the emotion, touched Yura's face with a cold little hand, an innocent gesture that filled his father with overwhelming love. They were alive. His son was alive. Boris, the hunter, watched the scene with tear-filled eyes. He approached Aksinya, who remained standing, her face turned to the wind, reading the tundra's messages. "Aksinya," he said, his voice choked, "we can never thank you enough. You saved us. You saved all of us." The elder turned, a soft, warm smile illuminating her wrinkled face. "The earth gave us the path, my son. I merely listened to its whispers. True strength lies in our unity, in our faith." She extended a gloved hand, and Boris held it with reverence, feeling the ancestral wisdom. Aksinya felt the wind shift again, carrying away the last trace of the bear's scent. They had retreated, defeated by the elder's cunning and the forest's natural barrier. The immediate danger had passed. She took a deep breath, the icy air filling her lungs with peace. The herders, one by one, approached, faces marked by exhaustion, but eyes full of reverent admiration. They no longer saw a blind elder, but a leader, a living legend who had defied the impossible. That night, under a sky that for a brief moment opened to reveal the twinkling stars of Yakutia, the villagers lit bonfires in the clearing. The warmth of the flames drove away the cold and darkness. The scent of roasted reindeer meat promised an end to hunger. Misha, warm and fed, slept soundly in Lena's arms, while Yura watched Aksinya, sitting near the fire, her silhouette illuminated by the flames. She didn't speak much, but her presence was a beacon of hope. The journey had been arduous, full of fear and uncertainty, but overcoming it had forged an unbreakable bond. The village had found not only safe pastures, but a new understanding of its resilience. Aksinya, the blind elder, had proven that true vision lies in the courage to move forward, in the wisdom of listening to the earth, and in the unwavering strength of the human spirit. Hunger had been driven away, the harsh winter was still to come, but now they had Aksinya, and with her, the certainty that they could face any challenge. Human connection, altruism, and faith had triumphed over adversity, weaving the story of a legend that would echo for generations in Yakutia. The following morning brought an unusual calm to the clearing. The blizzard, once relentless, had subsided to a gentle fall of flakes, and the sun, though pale, tried to break through the clouds, painting the sky in shades of grey and pink. The scent of smoke from the bonfires mingled with the fresh aroma of pine trees, and the sound of 1,000 reindeer grazing in the snow was a melody of renewed life. The villagers, despite the weariness that still weighed on their bodies, moved with a purpose and serenity they hadn't felt in a long time. They built temporary shelters with branches and hides, their hands agile and accustomed to the cold, but their hearts lighter. Aksinya sat near one of the bonfires, her wrinkled hands warming themselves by the flickering flames. Her eyes, though unmoving, seemed to contemplate something far beyond the visible, a landscape of memories and hopes. Yura, with Misha nestled in his lap, approached her, followed by Lena. The boy, now more alert and warm, extended a curious little hand towards the fire, and Axinia, sensing his presence, smiled. "He is the spring that will come after the harshest winter," she whispered, her voice soft as the rustle of snow. Yura felt a lump in his throat. He looked at Lena, who held his hand, and saw in her eyes the same gratitude and love that overflowed in his own chest. The journey had transformed them, forging an unbreakable bond, not only between them, but with the entire community. Boris, who supervised the construction of the shelters, watched Axinia from afar. He, the strong and proud hunter, had learned true strength in vulnerability, true vision in blindness. The elder's wisdom was not just about surviving, but about living in harmony with the earth, listening to its secrets and respecting its challenges. He approached, kneeling respectfully beside her. "Axinia, the village will never forget what you did, your courage, your faith. You showed us the way." Axinia turned her face towards Boris's voice, a warmth in her expression. "It wasn't me, my son. It was the faith of all of us, the faith that life always finds a way, even in the deepest darkness. The earth gave us sustenance, and we, together, protected it." She paused, and the silence that followed was filled with the depth of her words. "Each of us has a vision, a gift. Mine was to listen to the ice and the wind. Yours was to follow, to trust, to protect one another. That is how we overcome the impossible." The village, now safe in the clearing, was not just free from imminent hunger. It was reborn. The experience of the journey, from fear to hope, from doubt to unwavering faith in Axinia, had etched an eternal lesson into their hearts. They had witnessed that resilience was not just an individual characteristic, but a collective force, fueled by altruism and deep human connection. The story of Axinia, the blind elder who guided 1,000 reindeer and saved her people from the 6 colossal polar bears and hunger, would be told and retold, not just as a tale of heroism, but as a parable of human resilience. Misha, little Misha, would grow up hearing these stories, and in his innocent eyes, Axinia's legend would be perpetuated, a beacon of hope and wisdom in the icy vastness of Yakutia. Axinia's village, now with a name that carried an even deeper meaning, would flourish not despite the winter, but because of the strength it had revealed in their hearts. True vision, as Axinia had proven, did not reside in the eyes that see the world, but in the soul that feels, and in the faith that moves mountains of ice. And so, in relentless Yakutia, the legend of the blind elder became the very essence of life. The essence of life, woven by Axinia's legend, manifested itself in every dawn that bathed the clearing with its pale, cold light. The village, now more than a collection of shelters, was a vibrant home, pulsating with the energy of overcoming. Days followed, bringing with them the routine of tending the herd, gathering firewood in the generous forest, and sharing stories around the ceaselessly crackling bonfires. Temperatures continued to challenge, but the fear of hunger had been replaced by a silent certainty. They had conquered the cruelest winter, and life, however fragile it seemed, would always find a way. Axinia, the blind elder, no longer led the march, but her presence was the invisible pillar that sustained everyone. Seated in her place of honor near the main fire, she listened to the murmurs of the village, the laughter of children, the sound of reindeer hooves in the distance. Her wrinkled fingers often traced small objects Misha brought her, a smooth stone, a peculiar branch, and she always found a story, a lesson, a piece of ancestral wisdom to share. Her eyes, though closed, seemed to see deeper into each person's soul, offering solace and guidance with a simple touch or a smile. Yura and Lena, now more united than ever, watched Misha grow, strong and curious, in each other's arms. The boy, who was once the burden that propelled them, had become the living symbol of their victory. He loved to sit at Axinia's feet, absorbing every word, every gesture. Yura, seeing the admiration in his son's eyes, felt immense pride for the elder and for his own ability to have trusted. Lena, with a renewed sparkle in her eyes, dedicated herself to the community, weaving furs and preparing food, her movements filled with a gratitude that extended to every member of the village. The family, once on the brink of disintegration by despair, flourished like the most resilient tundra flowers. Boris, the hunter, had shed some of his old rigidity. His physical strength remained, but it was now tempered by a new humility and a profound reverence for wisdom that came not from hunting, but from connection with the earth and with the spirit. He spent hours talking with Aksinya, learning about the nuances of the wind, the secrets of the ice, the silent language of animals. He became a more vigilant protector, not just of the reindeer, but of the very essence of the village, understanding that true leadership was to serve and protect, not merely to hunt. The community, in turn, had transformed. Voices that once whispered skepticism now sang praises. Hands that once clenched in despair now reached out in mutual aid. The story of the blind elder and the 1,000 reindeer was told and retold, not just as a heroic feat, but as a parable of human resilience. Children like Misha would grow up with the certainty that even in the deepest darkness, faith, unity, and ancestral wisdom could guide the way. Aksinya one day felt a warmer breeze, a subtle hint that the long winter was beginning to yield. A serene smile spread across her face. The village had not only survived, but prospered. And the legend she had woven with her steps and her faith was now the pulsating heart of her people. True vision, she knew, was not to see the world, but to feel its pulse, to hear its whispers, and above all, to keep the flame of hope alive in every heart. In the icy vastness of Yakutia, Aksinya's village was a beacon, an eternal testament that human connection and altruism could move mountains of ice and drive away the most colossal bears. Life continued, strong and resilient, an echo of the legend that had become its very essence.